Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, Bible prophecy is exactly what we're seeing right now as the coronavirus, now called COVID-19, a pandemic, spreads across the world. Only one continent that it has not reached yet, Antarctica, and causing the markets to crash, oil prices to drop, and people are panicking as widespread fear grips the inhabitants of this earth. Well, as that coronavirus spreads across the globe, there is turmoil of another kind taking hold, and that is crude producing countries have failed to agree on making production cuts, and that is a huge blow to world oil stocks. Now, in meetings last week, Saudi Arabia, the head of OPEC, was not able to convince Russia to join them in reducing the amount of crude they produce by 1.5 million barrels a day.
Yes, Russia's refusal to join the agreement did not sit well with the Saudi kingdom. And so over the weekend, they lowered their oil export prices to between $6 to $8 a barrel. In effect, initiating an oil price war with Russia. By doing so, they feel they can persuade Moscow to come back to the negotiating table.
Global markets have taken a huge plunge overall, including oil prices, which have seen their sharpest drop since the 1991 Gulf War. Now, on Wall Street, it's the same scenario. They even had to close early for the first time since 2016, so things are looking very bleak across the board in the financial world right now.
But why is Russia against reducing oil production while the world is facing a pandemic and more countries are telling their citizens to stay at home? Well, the reasoning is simple. They do not want to give expensive American shale oil the advantage over its competitors. Now, the mainstream media is blaming the entire economic crisis on Russia's decision not to join in OPEC's agreement.
Other countries are not pleased with the Saudis' decision to slash their oil prices. France, for instance, wants Saudi Arabia to include the international community in determining the price of a barrel of oil. Some experts are labeling Saudi Arabia's move as an economic scorched earth policy.
Well, Goldman Sachs analyst Damian Corvalin told RT, "We believe the OPEC and Russian oil price war unequivocally started this weekend when Saudi Arabia aggressively cut the relative price at which it sells its crude by the most in at least 20 years. John Kilduff, founding partner of Again Capital Investment firm, made this statement to RT, said, "This has turned into a scorched earth approach by Saudi Arabia in particular to deal with the problem of chronic overproduction. The Saudis are the lowest cost producer by far."
Well, a spokesperson for Rosneft made it pretty clear why the OPEC deal is a bad one, saying, "For Russia's interest, this deal is simply illogical. We, giving up our oil, our own markets rather, remove cheap Arab and Russian oil to make way for expensive American shale and make it worthwhile for them." Now, Russia, the second largest producer of crude oil, has now opted out of its 3-year-long partnership with OPEC and believes it can stand on its own ground to compete with U.S. oil interests around the globe.
Well, these developments have dealt a significant blow to the ruble, now at its lowest value since 2016. However, Russia insists it has enough reserves to wait out the crisis and still come out fine on the other side. OPEC has really caused a stir with their most recent decision to cut prices, and now they are trying to calm everyone down. There is much uncertainty as it seems no one has a clear game plan, and the situation just continues to deteriorate rapidly.
Well, with the outbreak of COVID-19, markets across the world are losing profit at an unprecedented rate. And unless you were a finance major in college, it might be hard to comprehend what all of this means to the average individual. Why are the markets crashing? Why are bankers worried? What in the world is a fiscal stimulus anyway? And why are mortgage rates being lowered to almost nothing?
Yes, unprecedented. Well, to understand all this, we need to first meet three key players. First are known as the investors. Well, investors are millionaires and middle-class citizens with modest savings and pensions. All investors have some money saved up, but people don't tend to keep their savings under their mattress anymore. They put them in the bank so it can earn interest and they can gain more money. Well, depending on how smart or how greedy the bank is, they will promise you X amount of profit each month for keeping your money in their bank.
Well, once the banks, also the second player, have your money, they start loaning it out to anyone who needs a loan. This is the third player in the understanding the financial game, the borrower. Well, the borrower is the one who drives our entire economy. So loans for things like the new hotel built in your city or the new jet purchased by an airline, the new grocery store built down the road from you, or your mortgage to buy your new home all come from the bank. So all this money goes into the economy to keep things running.
But how does it run? Well, every month borrowers make payments to the bank. The bank then turns around and pays the investors, who then put the money back into the bank. Well, as you can see, this revolving door type cycle works very well when everything is going smooth, but throw into the equation some unforeseen circumstance like a mortgage crisis or a pandemic, and all this quickly gets thrown out of balance.
Well, and as we've witnessed with the coronavirus outbreak, the pandemic that we're speaking about, mass shutdown along with widespread quarantine. With everything at a standstill, people lose jobs. Mortgages aren't getting paid. Factories and businesses come to a screeching halt. Suddenly, the banks are not being paid back, and the markets and investors begin to panic. From there, it only gets worse. Everyone wants their money, so they call the bank to pull out their money, and you guessed it, they don't have it.
Well, not to worry. Here is where the government steps in. As they see this mass panic and run on the banks taking place, they say the one word everybody wants to hear: bailout. As defined, it's a financial assistance or to a failing business or an economy. For them to hear those words, it spells relief.
Well, the government begins to print more money to give to the banks so the banks can keep paying the investors. They pretend everything is fine by printing ridiculous amounts of money and passing it back and forth between each other. Meanwhile, the real economy is suffering, with factories and businesses still shut down. The whole point is to create an illusion. Well, an illusion that has to work for weeks or months to allow the economy to recover and to prevent the banks from going bankrupt.
Yeah, because I could see that if people think that they're so far behind in recovery, they might just throw their hands up and say, what's it all for anyway? Well, you don't need to be an expert economist to understand how fragile this illusion is. We're running on borrowed time right now, they said. Eventually, the illusion will wear off and the banking dream world will absolutely collapse. The world at this point has been weighing lives versus the economy.
And one example of that is China shutting down everything, not worrying about their own economy, but rather the lives of their people. Others, such as America and Europe, tried to keep the markets going rather than the people safe. But what they got was the worst of both worlds: an economy on the brink of collapse and a death toll fast eclipsing that of China.
And one thing that's interesting between the United States and China, whereas the United States has trillions of dollars in deficit, China has trillions of dollars in surplus funds to kind of support their population, even in a situation that we see with the pandemic that everyone is having to deal with in some way, shape, or form. Well, in regards to more information on how this coronavirus is affecting people, and not just people, but states and cities, our chief correspondent Larry McGee has information on for us in regards to that. Larry, what do you have?
The dark clouds of epidemic woe continue to hang heavy over the globe as the pestilence of the coronavirus proceeds forth victoriously towards its crowning point. 100 countries are now said to be reporting cases of contamination with regard to the virus, with Italy being one of the nations harder hit. 16 million people in the small country are reported to be shut up and quarantined in their homes, and no one is allowed to leave or enter. Amid the many victims of the virus, which is said to strike those who are immunocompromised the hardest, Italy is now reporting over 1,400 new cases in one day and is believed to be at this point the worst hit. The Vatican has closed the doors of many of its establishments, including the Sistine Chapel, and Pope Francis is reportedly giving prayers through video links to discourage gathering at the Vatican. Doctors are struggling internationally to summon the courage to handle the overwhelming health needs of those afflicted, with some having reached their breaking point due to stress battling the invisible enemy. And speaking with reporters, Italian physician Dr. Rizzoli stated that the intensity of the crisis has brought him to the realization that he is not enough. The reality of the pestilence's impact in Italy is brought into sharper focus by the fact that its death toll related to the plague has now surpassed that of China, though it has reportedly less than half the cases of infections as China. The number who have died from the affliction in the Italian Republic is recorded now at close to 3,500. Conditions are worsening in Iran as well, with one person dying of the affliction every 10 minutes, according to the Iranian health minister. The head of the World Health Organization is said to have referred to the virus as the enemy of humanity, and doctors themselves are becoming ill and dying in some cases, attempting to combat it. Under current restrictions, Italy's 60 million citizens are only allowed to travel for work, medical reasons, or emergencies, with the exception of grocery stores and pharmacies. All shops have been shut down in the country until the 25th of the third Roman month. Similar measures have been enacted here in the States, where 1/4 of the nation's workforce has been quarantined to their homes. All this has followed infection levels rising to over 17,000 in the U.S., with 220 plus reported dead so far. Germanic and historically alarming terms such as essential worker are now being employed to determine those who are and are not allowed movement. In New York, the governor has instituted a 100% reduction in the state's workforce, with the exception of essential services. Illinois, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and California have all enacted similar measures. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, as Larry McGee concluded there, bringing it back to the United States, we see some of the states locking down, and this is probably a precursor for other states in the United States as what's to come if this coronavirus continues to spread at an unprecedented rate.
That's right.
Well, New York and San Francisco, usually bustling cities, are almost like ghost towns as the coronavirus has brought activities to a halt. The U.S. government has promised more tests available for the virus, but the fear is that the more tests that are done, the worse the scale of the crisis.
Currently, the U.S. is considered in a deep recession. Now, according to a statement by Bank of America, they said, "We are officially declaring that the economy has fallen into a recession, joining the rest of the world, and it is a deep plunge. Jobs will be lost, wealth will be destroyed, and confidence will be depressed." Well, with or without the coronavirus, economists have predicted that we would have a recession this year. The coronavirus has just hastened and intensified it.
Well, Bank of America also said when it comes to the policy response, there should be no upper bound for the size of the stimulus in our view. In other words, they want the U.S. government to keep printing that money. Well, fear and uncertainty is holding strong in the U.S. over what to do about this situation regarding getting tested and what to do to protect oneself and the general public. Now, the CDC website recommends stay at home, stay in touch with your doctor, and avoid public transportation. And what they're saying about staying in contact with your doctor is do it over the telephone or some type of telecommunication rather than going there in person if you have any of those symptoms.
Yeah, interestingly enough, that is one of the things that the medical establishments are encouraging people to not come in, you know, if that is the case, because they're already stretched thin as it is. They don't have the bed capacity, and it's just no need to make the situation worse by contaminating more people. Well, President Trump spoke to the press at a recent meeting regarding the coronavirus and the economy. in regards to the stimulus that the government is proposing for the United States, that government is planning to implement is going to be more than $1,000 in the per person, that is. And the president reassured the press that once we defeat this, what he's calling invisible enemy, we're going to get the economy back very quickly. Mr. President said that we want to have it to where when we win the war with the invisible enemy, these companies can immediately start and not have to rebuild from scratch.
And that would be a great thing if what President Trump is saying is going to hold true, but certainly the confidence of the American people would have to skyrocket for them to quickly jump back in the markets. Well, 2020 has so far been an interesting year where some might say that anything that could go wrong has. With oil prices plummeting, the stock markets crashing, and the ever-spreading coronavirus, this year has many people wondering what's to come next. In fact, regarding oil, the price of oil is so low that it's cheaper to buy a barrel of oil than it is to buy a case of wine. Now, the president thinks it's beneficial for the economy with the oil being cheaper, but what's the benefit if you can't go anywhere due to lesser travel because of the virus?
That's right. Well, with people not traveling, no one is going to the tourist areas or buying products that they would normally buy when they're there, and they're not buying the typical products that they would buy on a regular basis. So as a result, factories are also closing. People aren't working, and those people who aren't working aren't getting money, so they're not spending money as a result either. Currently, the U.S. shale industry is selling oil cheaper than it costs them to produce it. And airlines, hotels, and other businesses are considered businesses with no clients currently. So we saw this in 2008 when the housing market collapsed and a bunch of homeowners missed their payments, payments that they couldn't afford to begin with because banks and financial institutions lent money out to homeowners who couldn't afford the payments. And this was basically due in regards to greedy lending practices of the financial institutions. Well, now instead of just the housing market collapsing, we're looking at the collapse of entire industries. So that's pretty scary. Right.
Even what you mentioned there in 2008, nothing compared to what we're seeing right now with the markets actually having to halt the trading because of how much they are dropping, which something that the more that takes place, I could see the fear continuing to go and people pulling their money out, just as we reported. The coronavirus definitely having a effect both physically and mentally on the people of the United States and across the world.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier, the trust and the confidence of the consumer would have to pretty much skyrocket for them to go back to their previous ways of spending, as compared to what they're dealing with now, because there's so much uncertainty. In fact, it's interesting that Yisrael Hawkins and the House of Yahweh has been teaching for years things written in the prophecy concerning this time period, where the prophecy in Revelation actually shows that they would be mindful to not hurt the oil and the wine, referring to the lifestyle. And then the United States is doing just that, trying to stimulate the economy so the lifestyle of those who are here won't seem like it's being affected. But I think people are kind of teetering on the edge, and they can see pretty much that things are looking like it's going down the tubes unless something turns around very quickly. Well, if you're looking for a solution to not only the coronavirus, but your spiritual welfare and what you can do to keep yourself and your family safe from the things that are still yet to come, even greater than this, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on their website by going to yahweh.com. You can also go to yisraelhawkins.com or yahwehsbranch.com. You can visit our website by going to ypnnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@yahweh.com. For any international calls, you can call the number that's on your screen now. And lastly, don't forget to go to yisraelsays.com and AskYisrael.com, especially in the times that we have, that we're living right now on this earth. You can put in the questions. You could type in even coronavirus and see what type of searches come up, or pandemics, diseases, and so forth, and get loads of information that guarantee to occupy any time you might have to spend safe quarantined in your own house.
Great way to spend your time. Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, Yisrael Hawkins. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.